Hey, it's Netta, and I'm so excited to tell you that I've made a brand new quiz just for you called the Cravings Quiz. It's a quick 10-question quiz that I designed to get you thinking more deeply about your cravings, because the first step to feeling more in control around food, especially sugar, is to be aware of how cravings affect you. And whereas most quizzes give you generic feedback, I'm offering to give you specific, personalized feedback and practical tips to help you turn theory into action. So go to aftersugarclub.com and click on the big green button to do the quiz today and to take the first step so that you can get rid of cravings. Welcome to the Life After Sugar podcast, the podcast that's not just about sugar, but about your relationship with it and also with food and especially with yourself. So if you want to discover your life after sugar and hear inspiring stories from all kinds of people who also cut out sugar in their way, at their pace, for their own reasons, this is the podcast for you. Because when you take away the sugar, you can finally discover the real sweetness in your life. I'm your host, Netta Gorman, and in today's episode, I'm talking with Mark Morley, who's up in Newcastle in northeastern England, and who used to suffer from a whole bunch of food intolerances, which gave him some pretty awful symptoms, both physical and mental. He tells his story in this episode, and also how cutting sugar, and dairy especially, completely changed his life and his health. We'll get to our chat in just a minute. But first, I just wanted to tell you that if you're looking for some free resources, then I have plenty for you. First, download my 5 tips to get rid of cravings. And those 5 tips may not be what you think they are. So go to aftersugarclub.com and download your 5 tips today. Come check out the Life After Sugar Facebook page and subscribe to the Life After Sugar YouTube channel, as well as my Instagram account at MyLifeAfterSugar, which is where you'll get all kinds of inspiration so that you can see that it's perfectly possible to live a happy and active life, even if you don't eat sugar. You can also check out my TikTok account at Netta_LifeAfterSugar. All right, so here's my chat with Mark. All right, so I'm talking today with Mark, who's up in northeastern England. Mark, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you used to eat as a child?
Okay. So yes, so my story sort of begins about 16, in that I became ridiculously ill mental health wise. I had anxiety, stress, bit of depression, a bad stammer, but I also had weight problems. I was allergic and intolerant to everything under the sun. And this had been going on for about 10 years. And I think what sort of kind of caused this was, as a kid, I got an antibiotic for an ear infection, and then another one, and another one. And those symptoms just got worse and worse until about the time I got to 16, and a hospital appointment was just resulted in them saying, right, we're now going to put you on disability. Just sit and watch the telly. Don't worry about getting a job. And 2 things happened at that point. One was my dad exploded. Now, he was a director of a psychiatric hospital, and the drugs they were talking about introducing me to, he just did not want me to go anywhere near them. I kind of grew walking around psychiatric hospitals, and you'd see people shuffling and drooling, and some of the side effects were awful. But at that point, I kind of said, I just can't do this anymore. I've done this for 10 years. And I went off and I started to self-study, and I got into nutrition and self-hypnosis and NLP and psychology and anything I could find. And I kind of changed my diet drastically, removing sugar away as much as I could, to then 2 years later by running my own business as a disc jockey. Been running businesses ever since. But it was quite interesting that when I analysed that diet, my mum was trying to do her best, but we ate a lot of sugar And here in England back then, puddings came with every meal. School was a huge pudding every day. You get a treat of a chocolate bar or something every day at least once.
And
We'd
just
go
to
around.
tell my American listeners that pudding means dessert in American English.
It was just interesting that it was there all the time. And then to make matters worse, our next door neighbour had his own pop or soda business. And every couple of days, he'd throw a great big crate of cola or lemonade or something into the garden. And we drank a massive amount of that. And it's quite shocking how big that sugar's been. But then I don't know if you've seen the same. We've then moved into convenience foods. So my mum did cook everything from scratch to begin with, and then slowly all this convenience food came in, and the sugar levels have just gone up and up from there.
Yeah. So, what decade did you grow up in when your mum was cooking?
Oh, so 70s and 80s.
Yeah, like me. And so, once you got to 16, did you move out and start making your own food, or were you still at home?
I was still at home, but then I kind of moved towards being more vegetarian and whole food. So then I started cooking for myself.
Mm.
And interestingly, I didn't get taught how to cook. I kind of experimented. And I really enjoyed cooking. I really loved trying all these different foods. And one of the doctors who was guiding me kind of said, look, there's over 100,000 different foods on this planet. And most people stick to a basic of about 12, which is crazy.
Absolutely. And then the other tens of thousands of often just processed products by the food industry.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just absolutely crazy. And it was interesting for me to start veering off and trying different foods. But my parents saw this as very, very foreign, despite being health professionals in the NHS.
Yeah, and that's
And
the
I was,
national health system.
yeah, and I was just trying lots and lots of new things. And some of it, even the doctors, I was sort of pulling myself away from the doctors, were telling me not to try.
Like what?
Well, they told me not to use apple cider vinegar. They said that's just going to make your acid reflux even worse. But using that with water sorted it out in 2 weeks.
Hmm.
I was trying different supplements, and there's still quite a resistance with GPs now to use supplements, thinking that they're dangerous. In fact, I did run a health food store for 10 years and really became trained in a lot of this stuff. And when they're used in the right way, they're perfect.
Yeah. Um, I just watched a Netflix series that came out called Apple Cider Vinegar, by the way, about an Australian girl that sort of hoodwinked people because she said she had cancer and that, you know, organic foods cured her cancer. So I know there's a lot of discussion about, not necessarily curing, but how real foods and the quality of our foods can affect our health negatively. Well, not negative, positively.
Yeah.
Has that been your experience? Obviously, you didn't have cancer, but
No, no. So one of the problems I had was several asthma attacks a day was a common thing, lots of inhalers. And in fact, I lost most of my time at school because I was ill like that all the time. And then somebody suggested to me that dairy products were causing an autoimmune response. And within a week of pulling that out, not only had the asthma disappeared, but so did the IBS. Now, interestingly, on my dad's side of the family, me, my brother, and my dad, we all had IBS issues. My dad took a ton of medication. My brother's been talking about having his colon removed, and I just removed dairy.
and
And it's
what
like,
what were the symptoms of your IBS?
it was just I was constantly bloated. I was struggling to go to the toilet, lots of constipation. I didn't realize at the time, it wasn't until years later when I kind of sorted it out that the pain and the discomfort disappeared. And it's amazing what you can get used to and think is normal. But the more I introduced that fiber from the fruit and the veg, the better that got. And it's
Yeah,
never been an issue in over 30 years now.
amazing. And did your dad and your brother also make that change?
No, my dad stayed on medication right until he died. And my brother doesn't believe in any of this alternative stuff.
Fine.
So he's taken a ton of pills, but to consider having an operation to remove your bowel, he's now got ulcerative colitis. And this is interesting because we do see an awful lot of this in the clinic,
Mm.
and hypnotherapy can help with this, but diet is a massive way of improving these sort of
Yeah.
issues that are going on.
I've come across a lot of people who find that fermented dairy, like real probiotic fermented dairy that we make ourselves, because you can't really trust some of the store-bought
Yeah.
stuff, ha has made a lot of difference to their digestion as well. Have you
Yeah.
found that for
It's
people that you help?
it's not something we've worked with. We do work with fermented products, but not necessarily the dairy ones. And the reason being was when I was getting into nutrition, the doctor who trained me in all of this, he said, "Look, you're not designed to have dairy products."
Mm,
And he said, in fact, when we create dairy and we pasteurize it,
mm.
if we feed that back to the calf, it's dead within a couple of weeks, which is quite shocking. So I never understood that idea that we then we then give it to humans. But I do hear of some people who do really well with fermented dairy. And
Yeah,
I think one of the things we do in the clinic is we get people tested. We get a full health test done for them to see what's causing the problem. And if dairy is causing a problem, we gently try and get them to take it away, which can be difficult for some people. But again, one of the things we're seeing every time with those sort of tests is that lactose, that milk sugar, is also causing a problem. And
yeah.
especially when it's coming to obesity and weight loss, we see a much faster benefit by removing that lactose and dairy out of there.
Yeah, and that's, again, not for everybody, but for those people for whom it's a problem, yeah, removing it can be one of the solutions.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Yeah, because we're not all the same. And so when did you start studying nutrition?
I started when I was 16.
Okay.
I just got so fed up with that day of being told you're going on disability. I went round to the local library and I went into the health section and I just was borrowing 6 books at a time. That was the limit. And going back a couple of days later and just making lots and lots of notes. And
Yeah.
I mean, I was lucky. I did love biology at school and I loved how the body worked. And it was just kind of the more I got into nutrition, it was fantastic. But it's amazing to see how that's changed as well a lot. We're
What's
getting,
changed?
well, again, we originally thought that we all had to have dairy products.
Mm.
And now, one study I saw was 68% of the UK population are intolerant to it. But a lot of people don't know it. So we're getting better at looking at the studies and the way that we look at them. And it's also that we can sort of now sidestep some of this product's really good for you, but that's coming from the producers rather than independent sort of science tests.
Yeah, yeah. I think I saw a meme that said sort of 98% of nutrition studies come to the conclusion of the person who's funding them.
And it's also really interesting that you can get the data in front of two different people and they both take it different ways.
Ah, yeah, exactly.
So yeah, there's a lot going on and we're getting better at it, but I think we've got a long road to go as well.
Yes, definitely. And the approach that we have now towards nutrition studies and nutrition recommendations has changed. But would you say that the human body, human biology itself, has that changed over the last few years, or is that pretty stable?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think our biology has changed because we've moved more to processed products.
Mm.
So my grandmother ate a little bit of meat, but she ate mainly fruit and veg. She lived on a farm and she was very healthy till she was 92. In fact, she used to toddle down to the old folks centre at 92 and help the old days who were in the 70s. But she had a very healthy diet, which was very different to the one my mother had. And that must have a knock-on effect that if we're eating more and more processed food, we're keeping people alive with medication a lot more, but diet's changing, so that must change our biology. And then the other thing we're seeing is wheat. Wheat's an interesting one where more and more people are struggling with gluten. And there's an argument there, is that the pesticides that they're spraying on, or is it because we're using a modified wheat? And one of the things we do see, I do a bit of work with type 2 diabetics, is that wheat just really spikes those blood sugars.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. So I'm wondering myself, and I'm not an expert in the nutrition field like you are, but whether human biology takes, I think what I've read, like tens of thousands of years to really change. But if you feed it something, it'll react. And that's, generally what's happening. We've stopped feeding it real foods and started feeding it and I mean the human body generally, all these processed products. And the result is generally sickness, in the form of all kinds of symptoms like you had,
Mm.
including weight gain. When did you start feeling really much better? How long did it take?
Within about 6 weeks.
Crikey, that's really fast.
It was, well, the asthma stopped within 2 weeks, and that was a major benefit because that was causing a lot of anxiety. The IBS wasn't far behind that. So it is interesting. Again, with clients, we see these changes happening very, very quickly, but then slowly my fitness got better. My eyesight actually got better by really using a lot of smoothies. Trying to get everything I was told to eat was quite a challenge.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know, the other thing was the focus and the mental clarity. I really struggle. So again, in the clinic, when we have people who are intolerant to certain foods, just by removing them for a short period of time can really improve that. So yeah, that was very, very quick. But as a result, I've gone from going to the doctor almost every week to not using the doctor now for over 35 years.
Wow.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
last time I went, it was a back problem. I've not, and they asked, "Where have you moved to? What's going on?" And I think the only other blip was, now this was interesting. At the time, there was an awful lot of information about juicing and a
Mhm.
lot of adverts about juicing. And I went on a juice detox. And within about 4 days, I wanted to rip my skin off. I was itching like crazy.
How
And,
come?
and thankfully, well, I bumped into a lady who became good friends. She said, "You've got a candida overgrowth."
Ah.
So all this information saying, fruit juice is really good for you, naturally made, because I bought a special juicer and spending a fortune. But for me, it just does not suit me at all.
Yeah, and me neither, actually. It's like a huge sugar bomb for me. I also prefer to just chew my food rather than drink it. So,
Yeah, well, it's the time when you're busy and you're running businesses. However, just switching to green juice has made a hell of a difference. But
well, it's
today I'm,
funny. It's funny because I just find it's faster just to eat a piece of fruit or a vegetable
Hmm.
rather than get out the juicer, put it in there, then wash the juicer. It doesn't save time for me at all.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, sometimes what we do, me and my partner, will make a huge batch of green smoothie for the day,
Mm.
especially when we're busy with running two businesses. At least we can sip that all day along and keep going. But yeah, it is a faff, even with a really good juicer.
Yeah.
But candida is such a big thing. I don't know whether candida is really recognized where you are, but in the UK,
Oh,
they
yeah.
don't really know much about it.
It is. I mean, I know about it because, we move in the same circles, but I can't say whether, do you mean nobody by the doctors or nobody the general population?
I think a bit of both. In
Mm.
the So yeah, candida with doctors, they don't really recognize it. But I have noticed in Japan and France, they seem to take a bit more notice of it. The
Mm.
public just think it's a fungal infection. But again, there's a lot of different. In fact, when I went through that candida process, it took me about a year to clear it because looking back, the itching in certain areas I'd noticed I'd had way before I was 16. And of course, constant antibiotics will cause that and eating lots of processed sugar. But it was interesting that I went on a low carb regime for candida. And after a year, it hadn't touched it.
Wow.
And then I got a book. Somebody gave me a book called 80-10-10, I think by a Dr. Douglas Graham.
Okay.
And he said, no, no, do it the other way. 80% good, healthy, complete carbohydrates, 10% protein, 10% fats. And within 3 months, that totally changed that around.
Oh, so that worked well for you.
Perfectly well for me, yeah. And I'm very much in favor of a high carb, but it's got to be complete. But again, I was working with a nutritionist recently, and although she had anxiety problems, she was the other way, very, very low carb. But that did suit her really well.
Yeah, goes to show, eh? We're all different.
Mm.
I want to take a quick break to say that if this is your first time here, then welcome and thank you for listening to this podcast. And whether you're new or a regular and you haven't yet rated or reviewed this podcast, could I ask you to scroll down and tap on the stars to rate this podcast and also to write a short review to let me know how this podcast is helping you in your life after sugar. I love reading your reviews. And when you rate and review this podcast, Not only does it encourage me to continue making new episodes, but it also helps to share this podcast and have more people see it so that we can help more people feel better and lose weight with less sugar. So again, thank you for rating and reviewing this podcast and for spreading the word about sugar. So, when you were seeing all these doctors, did none of them suggest changing your diet?
None of them at all. In fact, my dad did manage to get me in to see a psychologist who'd actually worked at the hospital he did, but she'd quit, stating she wasn't making a difference, and she'd become a homeopath. And she did sit me down and she said, look, change your diet, but mostly change your thinking. You know, look at books and find out what's healthy and look at it, but question everything. And another doctor who did give me a lot of advice on nutrition, he said, don't believe me. He said, go and try it yourself for a month. And actually, that's one of the things I did with dairy was I used to love pizza. I came off the pizza, and as that dairy disappeared within 2 weeks, the asthma stopped. But then at the end of 4 weeks, he said, no, you promised me you'd go back on it. And I did, and I felt like I'd been hit by a truck next day. And I like that approach of going and trying things. You need to give it 2 to 4 weeks, but notice how that makes you feel.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. And, I respect people, teachers, doctors, whoever, who say, don't believe me, question, experiment, and educate yourself. That gives you the power.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I got into trouble in school for, was questioning things too much.
I thought that was what school was all about.
Well, especially in a Catholic school, we were taught this is what you believe and that's the truth. And I used to get told off for doing that. But then when I started to get nutrition, I used to ask questions. One of the big things was, why are we getting pushed so much sugar on us?
Yes.
And later on, as I got into being a therapist, when we look at addictions, it can be the product itself, but it's massively the manipulation and the brainwashing that a lot of these firms are using.
Yeah. Can you give us some practical examples of what you've come across as social manipulation to
Okay,
consume?
well, can I use brand names? Is that all right?
Well, I don't mind. I don't suppose they'll sue us.
So we've got a big chocolate company over here called Cadbury, you might have heard of.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Now, we typically don't watch TV with adverts, but when we went on holiday, we saw this beautiful advert of a little girl and a mum on a corner outside a corner shop. You could sense that Mother's Day was coming up with the adverts in the window, and the little girl goes into the shop to buy a bar of Cadbury's chocolate with a couple of coins, and a couple of buttons. And the guy nicely on the counter gives her the chocolate and gives her the money back as change. And she goes out and says, I love you, mum. And the amount of emotion that's there in that advert is terrible. It's pure
Mhm.
psychological manipulation, and that we feel better because we have a product or we give it to somebody. Other ones would be Coca-Cola, and that they don't advertise the product, they advertise the emotion, whether a great Christmas or that you're with a loved one or feeling better. And alcohol does exactly the same. It's quite often saying sex has recently happened, or this is how you be a grown up, or this is how you relax. And some people don't believe how much those adverts really do affect you. But when we hit them again and again and again into the subconscious, wow, it's very, very. And then, of course, the supermarkets have always got the sweets right at the till. I've been working with a client lately who works for the CPS, the Crime Prosecution Service, and they're desperately been trying to get the sugar tax in, and saying the manipulation of putting these foods into people is causing a problem, but it's also very much linked to crime. And
Oh,
it's people just think, yeah, they've got to eat this, have this brand, do the other, and mentally that's a big, big challenge.
yeah. I mean, for sure, we have this impression, whether you're in the UK or here in Canada or wherever, that sugar is everywhere. You can't get away from it. And do you have the same in England? Do you feel
Yeah,
that?
it's trying to buy anything that's pre-made is massively full of sugar.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, it's almost, I know that people respond to me when I say that I don't eat sugar and I don't eat flour either or sweeteners, is that like, well, what do you eat? It's like impossible to imagine that there's anything left to eat. And my response is like, well, I eat food.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Recently, I went into a local little co-op store to get a couple of grapefruit, and when I got to the till, there was a new girl on, and she picks it up, looks at it, and says, "What the hell is that? Can you tell
Mm.
me?" And then she had to go in a book to get a barcode. And we've got children. Jamie Oliver was doing this, and that most people don't know where chips come from.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then it's and actually I did some fundraising for a charity a while ago, and we stood in stores for quite a while, and you'd see some people who are on benefits not working for whatever reason, constantly just coming in, getting a microwave burger, taking it home, then coming back for the tea, and it's just all processed convenience food,
Yeah. And
and
so one
that's the normal.
argument, sorry.
I said that's the normal in this country for a good majority of people.
Yes. And what an argument that I've heard is that real food is for privileged people and that the food system is economically discriminatory.
It is. I mean, a lot of foods are subsidized. However, um, 25 years ago, I went vegan and have slowly refined that to be a whole food, plant-based vegan
Mhm.
rather than all the stuff that's come out. That dramatically dropped our food bill each week than buying the things that were pre-made, and it was cheaper than buying meat. So if you know how to cook, we can buy lentils in huge bags. We can make a huge soup that'll last almost a week. I prep a big salad every Sunday, and that lasts us 4 days. It's there, it's easy to grab. I can put in a tub to take to work into the clinic. Actually, I find that's cheaper than buying a lot of pre-made stuff. But then on the other side of it, the health benefit is I don't use those doctors anymore. I do use a chiropractor, but because we look after our health, that's way cheaper than having to go to the doctors because I'd have to pay for medication in this country, and that's about £10 a pop, I think now.
Is it, do you not have your national health system anymore?
We do, but unless you're on benefits, most medication you have to pay for.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
the other side that we're seeing as well is the NHS, because it's been really underfunded the last 5 years or more. So many people are having to go private,
Mm.
especially when it comes to mental health issues,
Yeah.
which is a real shame, but that can be expensive.
Yeah, definitely. So prevention, I mean, we know the saying that prevention is better than cure, but it's not very popular, is it?
It's not. But if people get themselves into a state, which we see every day in the clinic, where they've not worked for 5 or 6 years and they're living on benefits, that's a very expensive way of life, and it's not good in so many ways. And yeah, prevention is the way to do it. But there's a rule I have with mental health is that first of all, your mental health or your health is your responsibility. And although as wonderful as the NHS was, a lot of people believe that as soon as they get ill, they just go to the doctor and they get a pill for it.
Mhm.
But then there's side effects coming from that. And then the other rule is you need to reach out to somebody who knows what they're doing. And a lot of our doctors today, as we mentioned, don't have any training in nutrition. In fact, the
Yeah, that's
GPs that I work with, their own health is awful.
it. Yes, I found that as well, where, we're sort of obliged to give disclaimers and whatnot. I am certainly about, check with the doctor before making any sort of dietary change. But the irony is, I'm not sure that doctors actually get much training in nutrition.
I think in this country, they're lucky if they get an afternoon out of so many years doing that. Some of them don't get any at all. Nurses do. I find the nurses are a bit more open. And interestingly, we've had to bring a lot of doctors in from other countries. I find Indian doctors are really good because they've got a much more balanced view of nutrition and health and alternatives as well. But some of our clients, when they come to us and they've been working with the doctor as well, the doctor will have a go at them for going to see somebody alternatively or complementary,
Yeah.
which
Yes,
is a shame.
it's similar here, actually. I wanted to come back to your own nutrition. Now, how do you navigate things like, going out, holidays, out and about, like when you're um, plant-based, real foods and no sugar, like how do you live day to day like that?
So I'm not 100% processed sugar free. The rule I have for myself and the clinic is 80-20. If I can be good 80% of the time, we can have treats at the weekend if we feel like it. But I do notice a difference mentally if I go and get a pie or a pasty.
Mhm.
But I think if you try and do it 100% one way, it's difficult for the average person to do.
Yeah, fair
But
enough.
typically, for breakfast, and to lunch, I love fruit. So quite often, if I'm out and about, I can go to almost any corner shop, find bananas, apples, grapes, these sort of things. But I also carry a rucksack with me, and I've always got some things there, so that's nice and easy. Most of the time, what we do, I love to cook anyway, and even on holiday, I prep. But if we go out for a meal, I can go to a Chinese and say, "These are the things I'd like that sort of meal, but can you do it without the sugar and the oil?"
Mm.
I'm
And they
very,
do that?
they'll do that for you. There's a little app we've got called Happy Cow for vegans, which tells you which restaurants where around the world can do certain things, and we can just ring them up and say, "Is this something you can do?" So most of the time we can go. But if I have a bad meal once or twice a month, I don't moan about it too much.
Yeah, fair
So it's
enough.
enough to do. But fast food for me is apples and bananas and grapes because we can get them almost anywhere.
Yeah.
And some people just say that's difficult, but I think again it's just changing the mindset.
Yeah, yeah. And again, what works for one person might not for another. I have great difficulty digesting fruit and vegetables and can
Really,
have to keep them to a complete minimum in my diet.
right? That's
You
interesting.
know, we couldn't be more different. And when I eat a big steak on its own with butter, I'm fine. And I'm not keto or anything. I just respect my own digestion.
I think there's definitely something there that different people do have different ways that the bodies work,
Yeah.
and we're seeing this more and more. It's fascinating. However, as part of us getting people tested, is quite often it comes up with a list of 12 foods they're intolerant to. We recently discovered a hypnotic process where we can actually then reset that system so that we find a way for those bodies to be able to start digesting those foods again. And it is interesting with some people, especially when we get them on beans and lentils, that they do get a lot of bloating and gas. But usually over 6 weeks that settles down.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that soaking my beans, lentils, if I do decide to eat some, makes a huge difference.
It does, it does. And the other one is apple cider vinegar. Just
Yeah.
adding a little bit of that into a glass of water before a meal can really improve the digestive system.
Yeah,
And
I've
it, it
heard
it is
that.
it's interesting because we do seem to work with a lot of type 2 diabetics lately. And their old way of eating's kind of caused that problem. So when we start to get them to try new flavors, we say try them about 12 times, notice what your body reacts like. And it's amazing how people slowly start to get to the point where they prefer the fresh, healthy foods when they're not eating that. And it's interesting in so many ways that, especially up here in Newcastle, we've got a lot of people who just eat bacon and eggs for breakfast
Hmm.
and then the same lunch and the same dinner. My parents were like that, same meals every day of the week. Monday
Yeah.
was a chicken curry night, Tuesday was whatever, Fridays was fish. That when they start to try new things, the taste buds change, and then they seem to sort of move towards eating a lot more healthier foods. It's as though the body knows. But the same with me when I went on that green juice fest. When I came off it, the first thing I had were some oven chips.
Huh,
And when I ate them, I went, why is the sugar on this oven chip? And when I
really?
checked the package, dextrose and maltodextrin.
Yeah.
And again, this food science is, well, this keeps people addicted for longer. And that was interesting. I actually had a conversation with a diabetic expert. My ex-wife became diabetic, and we had to take her in, and they just told her to eat not very healthy diet, but to keep her blood sugars down. And one of them was, oh, you can eat as many crisps as you like. And I took this expert to the vending machine and we got a bag of crisps and said, do you notice that's got sugar? And that expert didn't have that knowledge.
Yeah, yeah, and sugar and a whole bunch of other things. And yes, I've heard that argument, not so much keep blood sugars low for diabetics, but keep them stable. And I'm like, yeah, stable right up there. They're always high, but anyway, separate.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you get into the realm, I don't know if you've studied this, of insulin resistance,
Yes. Oh, yes.
where the body is producing the insulin, but the fat from the bad foods is stopping that insulin being used in the body. And that's a simple thing to change. But if we don't long term, it just means more and more medication. And for us, certain things like metformin do do make anxiety problems a hell of a lot worse.
Huh. Yeah, there's a whole lot of sort of cross pollination, as it were,
Mm.
of different symptoms, especially side effects. Yeah. And so, have you found that with your plant-based diet, which necessarily means no sugar, because sugar's a plant at the base, that you just like how do you feel now if you were to describe your health?
I feel I'm 55. I feel energized. I'm fit. I get out and walk. I easily do 10,000 steps per day. But I've got quite a heavy job. This week in the clinic, I've had some suicidal people and some people in a really bad situation. Um, and I'm working with a group which is taking a lot of energy, but I'm getting through that week far better than when I was in my teens, sort of slowly transitioning to a better diet. And I feel really good. I don't seem to be aging like everybody else around me. And the big rule is I have to look after myself before I can help all these other clients with their anxiety, stress, and depression. So I've got to be in the best health to do that.
Yeah, yeah, we're the same age, by the way.
Right, good. Yeah,
Yeah,
funny getting
it's
old, isn't it?
well, we'd think that getting older is like inevitably slowing down, getting
Mhm.
tired, putting on weight. And I'm sure we're not the only two that have gone the other way. I feel that I'm getting younger as I'm getting older.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Your attitudes change, and what we thought was old at 50 years ago is really just where your life's starting to begin. You've got all this experience from the past to put in there.
Yeah,
And it's weird because I'm thinking about, I've had loads of people say to me, it's about time maybe you start to prepare to retire. But I'm thinking, I love what I do so much that even when I retire, I'll still be doing something or other that way. But I want to have the energy to do that.
yeah, wonderful. It's a smashing message there for everybody listening, that it doesn't, you don't have to feel worse as you get older.
No, I think we do have to make some changes and we do have to look after ourselves. So one of the things I started doing a few years ago was getting down the gym every morning. Just that routine of getting up, getting in the gym, listening to something positive,
Hmm.
really sets me up for the day.
Smashing. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then and it's interesting when I see clients of my age who you think were in their 70s, but then the other day I was working with a guy in his 80s and he's younger than I am mentally.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a one-way journey. Yeah. And
Mm.
you've got that power, I believe, within you to make those changes, whatever they are.
That's a nice way to think of it, that we've got that power, we've got that ability, we've got those choices. And again, with a lot of clients, they get unwell and they're stuck. They've got no choice. And I say, no, you have got the choice. You can
Yeah.
choose that pasty or you can choose that banana. Why not choose the banana 80% of the time and have the occasional pasty?
Yeah.
And then you see them change and say, actually, I prefer the banana than the pasty.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, yeah. And you are living proof that you experimented, you educated yourself.
Mhm.
And, those two things I think show this open-mindedness that I think is the key to change for the better.
That mindset's really important. And it is interesting that a lot of people get, I don't mean to knock the NHS, but they feel they've been abandoned is the word probably we've had in the last couple of weeks, that they've gone through the system and it hasn't helped. And then they come and see us and we say, yeah, we think we can do something about it. Or we recommend you to the chiropractor over the clinic or the osteopath up the road. And there are choices out there and people just think they're stuck, especially with mental health issues. We've got such a high rate of getting those reversed or eliminated. But I've got to put in that we're quite picky on the clients and we say, well, are you going to put a little bit of work in each day to move forward with your goals? And then what are your goals? And a lot of people say, well, I just want to be normal again. And I say, no, no, we have to have something really big there to move to. So why is it we're doing this? Why is it we're going to drop the sugar? What are the reasons? But it's interesting, there's people like you, they're educating people, which makes life an awful lot easier.
Definitely. Yeah. And if people, especially in the UK, want to find your clinic, how can they do that?
You can find us online at escapeanxietynow.com, or you can also find us known as Newcastle Hypnotherapy. We've actually got 2 different businesses, and we do all sorts of workshops and give away freebies. We've got quite a lot of work going on, but yeah, we're always there. And if you fancy a chat, we can always help with that.
Smashing. Thank you so much, Mark, for talking to me today. Very inspiring.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
What a fascinating and inspiring conversation with Mark. And I hope his lovely northeastern accent didn't stop you from understanding his message, which is that cutting sugar, or at least reducing sugar, is one of the tools that you can use to start improving your health, whether it's with food intolerances, with mental health, or any other health issue. Certainly, reducing sugar can't hurt. But cutting down or cutting out sugar is much easier said than done. And in my experience, the most difficult step is the first step. And that's why I'm inviting you to take the Cravings quiz. It's a 10-question quiz that I created especially to get you thinking a little deeper about your cravings. And whereas most quizzes give you generic feedback about your score, I'm offering you a free 15-minute call with me so I can give you some personalized advice based on your quiz score. And just a short 15-minute chat together could make all the difference to get you started on getting rid of cravings. So go to aftersugarclub.com and click on the big green button, Do the Cravings Quiz. That's aftersugarclub.com and click on the big green button to do the Cravings Quiz. Speak to you soon. That's it for this week. Keep in touch and see you soon for another episode.